Welcome to another episode of CEO Tradecraft. I'm your host, Jason Radisson. Today, my guest is Mike Linton. Mike and I go back more than 20 years. Mike has been the CMO of eBay, Best Buy, and Farmers Insurance. He's run billion-dollar budgets, and he's minted more CMOs than an Academy company. When I asked him why CMO hires go wrong, his answer was uncomfortable. Most boards don't start with outcomes. They recycle old specs, they bypass alignment with the leadership team, and then they act surprised when the hire flames out. This conversation also covers why you can't just optimize the parts of marketing you can measure, and why personal preferences in the C-suite are a terrible proxy for what customers actually want. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of CEO Tradecraft. My guest today is Mike Linton. It's a real pleasure to have you on, Mike.
It's great to be here, and 20 years, long time, but great to still be kicking.
Yeah, right. Well, we just jump in. I think one of the paradoxes of today's world is how much media is decentralized. And the more I think about it, the more it seems to me that the anomaly was really centralized media. And we're in this period now where we're back to flyers and anonymized contributions and a little bit of the crazy decentralized world before 20th century media and TV and broadcast. Mike, do you see it the same way? Like, what's happening?
Well, look, I think the media landscape has always been evolving forever. If you go back to, pre-electricity, you had newspapers carrying all the water, and then you have radio and telegraph coming on, and then you have television coming on. And now what you have is, yes, it's decentralized media, though with still a centralized structure, and also new media coming on all the time, whether it's the retail networks, TikTok, any of the things that are happening. AI now, the decline of search. So consumers have more and more choices all the time. And I don't think of it as the media landscape. I think of it more as where consumers get their information, and that I, as a marketer or a business, need to be wherever they are, giving them their information in a way they can hear it. I've never thought of it as a fixed market. In my mind, it's always been evolving at speed. And now it's probably evolving as fast as it's ever evolved because of, technology can create all kinds of new ways to reach customers every minute.
Right. So everybody can be a creator. Technology is probably soon will have autonomous creation. Some folks are experimenting with it already. Do you think this is that technical marketing versus brand marketing, left brain, right brain thing, just a new iteration? Or do you think there's more tension and this is going to be even more disruptive than it has been in the past with things we've seen?
Anybody can be a creator, but very few people can aggregate an audience. So one of the things that gets left out in some of the discussion about everyone being a creator, you might even have great creative, but you still have to aggregate the audience. And so I think there is two components to creation. One is the ability to have creative that can attract an audience. And the second is to get that audience there and keep them, which is always, in my mind, quite a challenging thing. The second thing you asked there was creative versus technology. I don't split those. You can't, consumer doesn't go just to technology, and they just don't go to creative. They go to the creative they want with the technology that they want to deliver it. And so I think what most marketers should be doing is coordinating all of this together to reach the consumers that mean the most to them for their company. My gosh, I got to figure out how to match all this technology with all my consumers with creative they can hear. And I think it's really easy to lose your way there, especially given the ability of a lot of measures to drive very short-term performance looks.
Is this different from the past and when, there were a marketer who was technical with somebody who could build a response model? I mean, is this just the next iteration of that? Now you need to know how to work with small creators, or is this something more?
I think so. I think it's the next iteration. And I have a tendency to look at this stuff outside in versus inside out. One of the things that is a real problem in a lot of businesses today is people take and optimize a single thing, whether it's mobile, web, direct to consumer, whatever you want. But consumers are not thinking that way. It's like, I don't think, I'm going to buy something digitally today. No, I'm going to the store to get something in physical retail. I think I'm going to a brand and I'm going to buy something. And if I'm in B2B, I am not just looking at their digital component or anything else. I am thinking of how they serve me as a customer. And one of the things I think that is super important for marketers is to think about how all these things come together in a way that the consumer reception is optimized versus each component is optimized. And I will say one of the biggest mistakes I think a lot of companies and people make is they think their marketing ROI or business ROI is so logical the consumer will have the same ROI. But we know that's not true because consumers have their own ROI and there are different versions of what they should pay for things.
Right. I mean, you and I have certainly had experiences where part of that marketing portfolio was super measurable. You could put it on some kind of hill climbing, run your experiments, continually improve it. And then you always had a part of the mix. You used to call this the part of the cocktail.
Yeah.
That piece that you can't measure, it's not the vodka, it doesn't do the lifting, but it's still really important for the overall mix. And I want to get to the talent side of this question also. Is that something companies perceive like, I know that I'm building my company on email, but I actually need these 4 other things to really work well? Or how does that play out in terms of talent and dynamics?
Well, I think there's a lot in that question, so I'm going to take it apart in a couple of ways. First, the cocktail analogy is you can't measure everything. So there's a tendency sometimes to focus on the part you can measure and assume that because you can't measure something, it's not working. But that would be like a doctor being able to look at all your vitals and all the test things and then saying, well, I actually can't measure this. I can't measure what Jason is telling me. Therefore, I am going to discard it as an input.
Right.
Like Jason says he has a headache or anything, but I can't measure that. So therefore, it must not exist. I think that is probably a deeply flawed way because that's not how, in my mind, consumers move. And the cocktail analogy was designed to say, look, you could I think I deconstructed a Cosmopolitan, which has a lot of ingredients. And you could actually measure them all and see which part of the ingredients were most effective. And that would be the vodka would be the most effective. And then you could eliminate all the other ingredients as superfluous ingredients. And then you would also discount the fact that a martini glass is a stupid glass because it breaks a lot. It gets knocked over. It's hard to wash. You should get a regular glass. And then you would scratch your head and go, how come no one is buying this 100% vodka shot in a perfectly round glass? Because the math on this says this should be the best possible ROI on my spending in vodka at my bar. And you'd wonder how come your bar was going down the drain. I think that is one of the things that is going on in some of the marketing, which is in your quest to get super efficient and to eliminate anything that is not perfect, especially for CAC, you can lose all the elements that make your bar great and make your drink great. You know, you'll take out the swizzle stick because no one even eats that. They don't do anything. They throw them on the ground. They're terrible. We can lose them. And I think that is the kind of thing where just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not working. And that's where judgment comes in.
Right. And I think a lot of times, just because you can't measure it, it might be now you can't measure it. Something about your conditions, your circumstances. You know, when I was in the ride sharing industry, Travis Kalanick always forbade us from doing any kind of billboard. I think boards and CEOs will often think of the marketing function as, well, I know the stuff I don't want, so I'll block those programs. You know, when I was running 99 in Brazil, I had the opportunity to do A/B testing on billboards, to take sister cities and do with and without a home. And if you think about it, right, it makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
People are in their cars. Of course, they're going to be driving by billboards.
So when you did it, did the company then look at it and go, oh my gosh, we should be doing billboards everywhere?
It worked tremendously. And it was important on keeping CAC down. That incremental bit was probably a 50% ROI, a 70% ROI in the 3 to 6 months of the early launch of a city. I mean,
that's a good story.
Impact.
And that to me is also the story of just because I don't like it doesn't mean my consumers don't want it.
Right.
And I think one of the worst things you can do is assume you know your consumers, especially if you're in the C-suite. You are usually nothing close to your consumers. And implying your personal preferences, because people say, I never open the mail. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, that's you. There might be a bunch of people, particularly if we're selling a product to some various segments, where they still care about mail and they still care about a catalog. So just because you don't like it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's what works for your company.
I think it's very well said, and there's this real difference inherent in the board CEO CMO relationship is this difference in cycle time. Okay, we're going to have the next quarterly board meeting, and the reality is you can test something and figure it out a lot quicker than that. You don't have to work with decrees or negative decrees. So I think some of these management mechanisms, particularly when it comes to marketing, where everybody can see it and have an opinion on it, can be pretty crude and out of cycle.
Well, yeah, I do have this thing where being the CMO is like being the manager of a Major League Baseball team, because everyone can see everything you do and everyone has an opinion and everyone thinks they can do the job. And so one of the things I try and do for my teams, and what I would always want in my jobs, is the ability to experiment wherever I think my consumer is without having to fight my own company on. And I think a lot of boards and CEOs will just override things based on what they believe, which they won't do with their finance people, and go, I lost some money in my international investments, or bonds suck, so we're not going to do any bonds. I think that is where a bunch of people make huge mistakes, and they shut down the testing required to understand your actual customer interface.
Well said. Do you think, on that note, can you be a successful marketer if you haven't had exposure to scale?
Here's how I think about scale. First, your ability to actually see scale, and a mindset about how scale occurs. So I think you can actually grow into scale, but some people are very hardwired not to do it. They're very hardwired to control everything. And one of the things about scale is, if I am making, let's say I work at a bank and I'm making, I'm a loan officer and I can run, 100 loans or whatever. When they promote me and suddenly I'm managing 20,000 loans, I have to think about it differently, managing through the people. If I don't have the right mindset to do that, no matter how much practice I get, I'm going to screw it up. And that's where you get the micromanagers. And one of the things I think about scale when I am talking to people about it is, can you actually see it from where it is today? And then do you have any beliefs on how that scale might change the company and how the company manages? You must have seen this at Uber like crazy, which is, gosh, as we scale, I mean, that must have been quite an interesting look at scale and people that could handle it and people that couldn't.
Very much. And one of the ways we worked through that was playbooking things, where every new business unit, you think of like a city or a region as a business unit, every new one stands on the shoulders of the previous ones.
Yeah.
We did this intuitive and I think very helpful thing. We put people on vector-based planning based on previous cities that look just like theirs. Because then, you're competing against a team that went before you, and you're making updated calls on how those levers work and where you need to make adjustments. Nobody's doing experimentation on things the company already knows. It's also not destructive competition where two units are head to head trying to kill each other.
Well, the other thing I don't want is the not invented here thing when I go into scale. I think one of the things as you start scaling up any business is, what's the most important thing about scale that you want? Like, do you want to capture geography or market share at speed? Do you want to do it in a way, where profit is a secondary thing? Do you want to do it where you're making profit? And do you have the mindset that can do this? Because sometimes you're going to have to adjust the playbook. And so you want people to take what is available and use it, challenge stuff that might be on the edge or wrong, but don't just reject stuff because it isn't yours. And that to me is the mindset issue, which is, am I looking to do this as well as possible, or am I looking to do this my way? And I
100%.
think one of the things when I am hiring people for scale, I want to see them prove to me that they see problems where they're going to pick any answer they can find anywhere and do it as well as possible versus do it their way.
Yeah.
And I think when people do it their way, that's when they micromanage and usually scale gets knocked off the rails.
For sure. Incentivizing and, how do you instrument? What are you measuring? You have metrics. And if you're running on the company playbooks and trying to improve, the hiring brief is you're here to take what we already know and set on top of it. Right. And the
I agree
metrics
with
are
that.
the same, and then show that you can get rate improvements, show that you can get volume improvements. And I think crucially, as we got later and later into the gig economy, show that you can bring efficiency improvements, not just growth, but we want to see every marketing dollar spent being more efficient than the last one based on
Well,
what
and
you
I think sometimes I'm in the pure efficiency space, but sometimes I'm not. I think it depends on what the company needs, what the marketplace offers, and what we are willing to risk.
did.
Because I might go against some efficiencies to take market share or launch a business where I think if we don't do this now, we won't have it. Like when I was at Best Buy, we bet a huge amount of money on Geek Squad because when we bought Geek Squad, it was 11 people. I didn't buy it; the merchants and the service people bought it, but I did, my team did help scale it. That was a bet that first mover is going to win this game big, and that was a totally willing bet. We didn't make sure it was exactly right. We kind of threw that ball really downfield. And to me, that is when you're thinking about what is available, what risk can I take, and what does the company really want? And that's where it all merges together, at least in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the way I think about scale often is that a marketer has those experiences or those experiments run in their head. I think about the more than 1 billion homepage visits and things that you would
Yeah.
have at an eBay versus somebody who's come up in a startup that might only see 20,000 homepage visits a month or something. Like they just don't have that scale behind them where they know the answer already to thousands of different experiments.
Well, look, I'm with you. I would much rather have somebody that had proven they can see it. But there's a lot of questions you can ask in the interview process to check the mindset. But it's way easier if you prove the mindset already that you've done it somewhere. And so I'm with you on that. But I do think there is a big question. A lot of people cannot scale. Like it's one thing to manage, $10 million. It's another thing to manage $500 million. And a lot of times people can't make that jump, particularly if they're really hardwired in a certain way.
Yeah, 100%. So we were talking a little bit about talent and tangentially about talent. If we go to the heart of I'm a board, I'm a CEO working with my board, I need a new CMO. In this current era, what would be some practical advice for boards and CEOs?
Well, I have very strong opinions on this, which is I think you really ought to know exactly what you want. And that's outcomes versus the person or thing you want. Like and we've done a show on CMO Confidential for this, which is CMOs are like football players. They're not interchangeable. You may need a quarterback who's really good at a whole bunch of stuff, or you may need someone that's great at acquisition. You may be a smaller company and you care really about acquisition or something else. You should know exactly what you want. And then you should decide, I do not need to pay for a ginormously expensive quarterback who's not going to get his or her hands dirty refining the acquisition math. If really what I care about is acquisition growth in a D2C business, in a small business now, I should really understand that. So that is one, know what outcomes you want, and then look at the people and skill sets right for that. The second thing I think is make sure the lead team is aligned on this. Like, don't go off and hire the CMO and then have him or her come in and then be immediately at odds with what the product people or the sales people or the IT folks think. They should all be in on this job spec. And, we did a show where University of Virginia said 50% of the CMO job specs are wrong, misaligned, wrong. There's two other things I would say. The brand is not the person. Just because they come from Facebook or Google doesn't mean they really know a lot of technology. They might know one component of technology, and it doesn't necessarily make them a great leader. Think through what you're really getting and don't get blinded by the brand. And then the last thing I would say is decision rights. I encourage everybody going into a job, but surely marketers, know where your decision rights are and where they stop. Like, for example, if I didn't take jobs where I wasn't going to be in the final say on creative media planning, hiring and firing, I wanted a capital budget to invest, et cetera. I would really understand the decision rights and I would run them through the interview process so that you don't have this person that comes in that thinks they're in charge of getting an outcome, but they aren't available to pull the levers that drive that outcome.
Yeah. Sage advice.
Well, look, think about it.
If you for teams hiring
everybody,
and for candidates.
A bad hire is a tremendous mistake for everybody. It costs the company money. It costs people career steps. It usually costs the business. But if you hire someone and you say you're really in charge of driving all the sales and marketing and brand building, but 3 people get to vote on all the creative and the CFO is really controlling the media money, and sales sets the pricing, but you have to get growth. That is a job you shouldn't take because you have an outcome, but all the levers are run by somebody else. And everyone laughs when you say this, but then when you talk to people in the market, this happens all the time.
Yeah. I don't think it is exclusively CMOs, but
no, it's not. But
probably more CMOs than a lot of other C-suite positions.
Well, because everyone can see your creative,
right?
And I advise most people don't show creative to your boards. So the only thing that can happen is the best thing that can happen, they say you're great, this is great creative. The worst thing that can happen is they can start inputting on your creative, which means you've just given away all your decision rights.
Right.
So, yeah.
I wanted to ask why job specs are wrong, in your opinion. Like, what do you think is the root cause of them being wrong? We tend to see a greater specialization in boards, less just general athletes, a lot more hiring for specific board functions and deep subject matter. There's just not the same kind of consensus? Like, what is it that's driving bad CMO hiring?
I think there's a bunch of things that can make a job spec go wrong, and surely they're not all wrong. One of the things that can make it wrong is you just borrow it from your friend, or you use the one you used last time, or you have your old job spec that, Spencer Stewart or Korn Ferry or CRG or whoever had it, I'll just use this one. No. You don't actually start with the business outcomes you want. You go right to the job spec. So then you interview off the job spec because you're lazy on the job spec. Or you think it doesn't matter. We'll know the person we want when we get them, and we'll just use this job spec to, so like chum in the water, and then we'll get what we got. That's one. 2, you don't run it by the whole lead team for real, or the lead team doesn't really pay attention. Or the job spec is so generic, it doesn't matter. Like, you're going to be in charge of growth and you're going to build the brand and it's going to be great. And they don't tell you where your decision rights are, how much money you have, and what you are in control of. So when you arrive, it's all wrong. And a lot of people have different expectations of what you're going to do for them versus the company. I think the other thing is meddling in the job search isn't the right word, but people, like, especially from the board, going, oh my God, well, you're almost done with this, but you got to talk to Jason. You got to talk to, the best person I ever worked with when I was in a company, but you should talk to him. And then Jason gets shoved in this search in a way that the entire process is messed up. And again, you're laughing and it does seem ridiculous, but it happens all the time.
Totally. Yeah. Without, calling anybody out. But, definitely from my board experiences, you get those calls. Hey, I want you to see a candidate. And,
will you just do me a favor and see Jason, because he is. And, if you're a board member, you can say this, you are messing up the whole thing. It's like Jason might not be exactly right, or you might be able to buttress him by having a VP of media or something under him. And what you are doing is you are undermining the entire process.
Totally.
And that happens so often.
It really does. So I want to get into a bit of the moment and where we are with creators. To me, it seems like the whole world is becoming audiences. And as board member and CEO of a startup in technologies, we're all out there active, growing audiences. Do you think this is just the moment? Does it mean you're going to have a real hard time as a tech CEO if you can't build an audience? What does the future hold for both building your own audience and scaling it?
I'm probably more mixed on this. First, I will say there's always been audiences everywhere. You can just now supercharge reach them. I mean, if you go back way back in time, there's always been social media. It was just very limited to your neighbors or then who you could call on the phone. And now suddenly it's anybody you can aggregate. There still is the need to aggregate, even if you're spectacular. Should everybody be good at this? I don't think you have to be, but I think your company has to be where your consumers are. And sometimes that means your CEO has to be where, especially in a B2B space or something, you might have to be the face of the business, at least partially. And then the other thing I will say, if you're out there and you don't have some kind of personal brand, you have to do what the marketplace demands, not necessarily what you want. And you have to do what your customers want, not necessarily what you want.
And on that note, what have been some of the experiences you've had with your own highly successful podcast, CMO Confidential, and we'll link to it in the show notes here.
Thank you.
What's it been like building the audience? And I think you recently had a milestone of 100,000 on YouTube. What has that audience journey been for you?
Well, we started this for fun because 14 of my team went on to be CMOs, and I still am in touch with a lot of them and a lot of folks in marketing. I thought we started out even in the very beginning with pretty good shows, aggregating an audience. It's not like everyone's out there going, you know what I'm looking for? I'm looking for a new podcast. It took quite a while to get to 100,000. I think we have close to 140 shows now. 100,000 on YouTube. I think we're around 150 total. And this goes back to my point of just because you make great content or you're interesting, and hopefully we're doing both, that doesn't mean the audience is ready to find you. There's slews of great TV shows that didn't make it because nobody watched them, that all the critics love, and things are great. We worked really hard to build that audience. And then we also spent a lot of time making sure the content was consistent. And then my producer, Jeff Culleton, would cut it up and put it out during the week so people could get sampling of it. But building the audience is probably harder than even doing the shows.
Any particular tactics or things that, and obviously it's been a journey of a couple of years, but things that stand out or plays that you think they might emulate?
Are we talking podcasting or are we talking something? Podcasting.
Generally building an audience.
I think when I started the show, I had a real objective for what the show was designed to help marketers and people that work with marketers get the most out of marketing. And it was designed to take a 360-degree look at marketing. In a way, it wasn't everybody telling you how great you were. It wasn't all about any of the known topics like brands are important or you should be on the efficient frontier or analytics and creative should talk to each other. It wasn't about that. It was about the things that you couldn't really talk about that much in the open, and points where people either you didn't know who to talk to or the science was unresolved. And we've been, I think, pretty true to that objective. And I think having an objective and then hoping the listeners agree with that objective, but staying true to it is super important. I think consistency, we drop a show a week is super important. And then, we have principles for how we write the show. You can't just come on the show and sell any of your stuff or anything like that. You have to be talking about an issue people care about.
Well, excellent. And congrats again on the milestone. That's probably a good place to leave it. Any parting advice for boards and CEOs thinking about the marketing questions today?
Yeah, I guess one of the things would be if I'm sitting on a board or if I'm the CEO, I really want to structure and hire marketing to get the most out of it for the company. And that means I really have to think through how the marketing strategy fits into the business strategy and then hire for that. I can't just say, God, I really want a great brand person or I really want a great acquisition person. I should think through marketing as a tool for the company. Marketing can help drive particularly a lot of growth strategy, and you should think through how marketing works and then what outcomes you want from marketing as it associates with the business before you go hire a marketer.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that pattern you're talking about where someone will say, well, I need a great email, fill in the blank, Facebook marketer who can also run the agencies. And That's
Yeah, look, I
basically
need
the
somebody from Facebook because I understand
Yeah,
all this stuff, and
yeah.
we got to get somebody. And I'm like, why don't you figure out what you want, and
Right.
then look at all the places you can get that, but also make sure you want it for the reason, for the business outcome in a financial way. Like if you say you want to build the brand, that's great. You want to build the brand, why? And then how much are you willing to spend to build the brand, and how long is your time horizon on that? Don't just say you want a brand and then have someone come in and go, well, you got 3 months to build the brand, and here's, $4 million.
Right.
Go ahead, knock yourself out. You're just setting up for failure. And that goes back to my earlier point on misaligned expectations in the job spec.
100%. Well, awesome. Well, Mike, thanks again for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That was Mike Linton, 5-time CMO and host of CMO Confidential. If you're hiring a marketing leader or you are a marketing leader, his core message is worth repeating. Know what business outcomes you actually want before you write the job spec. A link to CMO Confidential is in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.